Hello and welcome to Report World News. My name is Barnona Zarzoda. Uzbekistan's northeastern Dizak region will see the implementation of more than 500 projects worth over $3.4 billion by the end of this year. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev reviewed the projects on February 15.
Qaysi soha bo'yicha nima yordam beraylik? Katta loyihalar, driver deganimiz, meva-sabzavotda qayta ishlash bo'yicha bir logistika yo'q.
The total annual volume of new production facilities is to amount $2.4 billion, with 23,000 new jobs to be created. The projects are to deliver $264 million worth goods that will substitute for imports. Exports will amount to $311 million. 8 projects are to be implemented in the construction materials industry. These include the production of basalt fiber and various materials made from it. The $68.5 million facility is expected to start operating in the third quarter of this year. A number of projects are also planned in the automotive industry. A project for the production of minibuses, commercial vehicles, and trucks will be implemented by the end of the year. A $39 million textile complex will be put into operation this summer. BMB Trade Group is to establish the cultivation and processing of saffron in the Bakmal district. The $30 million project is to create 200 new jobs. Projects are also expected in the animal husbandry, poultry farming, processing of meat and dairy products, and the production of silk fabrics.
Uzbekistan has tripled the supply of mung bean to China, country's embassy in China reported. Over the past 2 years, the share of Uzbek manufacturers in the Chinese market has increased from 26% to 36.5%. China is a huge market with a growing middle class of more than 400 million people. It ranks first in the world in terms of food retail sales. China's consumer market is set to expand by about 12% every year to reach a value of $8.4 trillion by 2022, according to Oxford Economics. Due to the lack of its own mung bean, China imports it from other countries. The main suppliers are Myanmar, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Australia and Thailand. Uzbekistan inked dozens of bilateral agreements in the trade of economic sphere during the visit of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev to China in 2018. Among them is the protocol of phytosanitary requirements for the export of mung beans from Uzbekistan to China. Uzbekistan is negotiating with 12 leading manufacturers of coronavirus vaccines. The vaccination is scheduled to start in early March, the Service of Sanitary and Epidemiological Welfare and Public Health informed.
Most of the population will be vaccinated as soon as the at-risk groups receive the vaccine. These are elderly people aged over 65, people with chronic diseases, medical personnel, employees of preschool, secondary and higher educational institutions, law enforcement officers who work in close contact with the population. At the same time, vaccination will take place only on a volunteer basis. It said, vaccination facilities and mobile teams have already been created in Kyrgyzstan, regions of the country and its capital city. On February the 11th, Uzbekistan initiated the formal process of certifying Russia's Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine. This process is expected to be completed by mid-March. The country is also engaged in trials of 2 Chinese vaccines and plans to purchase 100,000 doses of the Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine.
The representatives of Embassy of Uzbekistan in South Korea met with the South Korean Aerospace Research Institute representatives and the company SI Imaging Service to discuss cooperation in the field of research and use of space for peaceful purposes. Despite the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, the parties noted the positive dynamics of the consistent development of cooperation in this direction. Several rounds of talks have been held between the specialists of the Ministry of Science and ICT of Korea, South Korean Aerospace Research Institute, and the Ministry for Development of Information Technologies and Communications of Uzbekistan. A joint Uzbek-South Korea task force was created to implement joint projects in this sphere. The South Korean side noted its interest in further enhancing cooperation and exchanging experience. Uzbekistan saw a surge in garment export last year. The country exported ready garment worth $459.3 million, $136.4 million more than in 2019. Russia became the leader in the purchase, importing $247.2 million worth finished textile products.
Kyrgyzstan imported garment worth $170.6 million. In addition, Kazakhstan bought goods worth $17.5 million. Ukraine $4.9 million. The rest of the importers were Tajikistan, Moldova, Belarus, and Italy. The largest volumes were made by enterprises of the Andijan region, which produced ready-made clothes worth $43.6 million.
Uzbekistan's foreign trade turnover amounted to $36.3 billion last year, with a negative trade balance at $6 billion, according to data provided by the banking regulator. My colleague has the details.
A $5.5 billion decline was mainly due to the suspension of the activities of enterprises and the closing of transport links during the pandemic. In 2020, Uzbekistan exported goods and services worth $15.1 billion, down 13.4% year-on-year. Gold accounts for about 44% of all exports. The export of textiles increased by 18%, machinery and equipment by 9.4%. The export of energy and oil products, cotton fiber, fruits and vegetables decreased.
Uzbekistan's Cabinet of Ministers is aiming to establish a new university, the International School of Finance and Technology, which will train personnel demanded in the real sector of the economy, as well as introduce modern technologies in the educational process and cooperate with foreign universities and research centers. The campus of the future university is planned to be located in the Kibray district of the Tashkent region. Uzbekistan set a temporary ban of the import of tomato and pepper seeds from the territory of Turkey's Bursa since February 12 this year. This was caused by the detection of tomato brown germination virus in the seeds of the listed tomatoes.
U.S. President Joe Biden's administration will use a virtual NATO defense gathering this week as a starting point toward rebuilding trust with European allies shaken by Donald Trump's America First foreign policy. U.S. officials who asked to remain anonymous said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin would emphasize Washington's commitment to the transatlantic treaty after Trump's open hostility. Biden's Republican predecessor publicly ridiculed NATO allies such as Germany, who failed to reach defense spending targets.
I think that NATO was not doing what they were supposed to be doing, a lot of the countries, and we were doing much more than we should have been doing. Frankly, we were carrying too much of a burden. That's why we call it burden sharing.
Officials said Biden would not abandon those targets, but will focus on bolstering NATO's collective defense.
Secretary General Stoltenberg, you are on now on speakerphone with President Biden.
Mr. Secretary, how are you?
Underscoring Biden's views on NATO, the White House took the rare step of releasing a video last month of the U.S. president's first conversation with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, in which he used the word sacred to describe America's commitment to the treaty.
It's a sacred commitment.
The NATO defense ministers' meeting comes as efforts to secure a peace deal in Afghanistan teeter amid rising Taliban attacks.
The Taliban must reduce violence.
NATO Chief Stoltenberg said on Monday Taliban militants must do more to meet the terms of a 2020 peace agreement with the U.S. if foreign troops are to withdraw by a May deadline.
While no ally wants to stay in Afghanistan longer than necessary, we will not leave before the time is right.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo took some blame for a scandal surrounding the state's nursing homes on Monday, after a state report that COVID-19 deaths among them were undercounted by as much as half. Cuomo acknowledged his office should not have withheld that data from state lawmakers, but fell short of issuing an apology.
We should have provided more information faster. We were too focused on doing the job and addressing the crisis of the moment, and we did not do a good enough job in providing information. I take total responsibility for that.
More than 15,000 people in New York's nursing homes and long-term care facilities have died from COVID-19. But the state has only reported 8,500 nursing home deaths as recently as last month. The numbers did not account for residents who died in hospitals rather than nursing home facilities. On Monday, Cuomo acknowledged that the media, state lawmakers, and the U.S. Department of Justice had all requested the full numbers as early as last summer, but said that his office prioritized the DOJ inquiry first, leaving the other requests unanswered. It all means new trouble for Cuomo, who, despite winning national attention for his early transparency about New York's COVID-19 crisis, has been criticized for his COVID-19 response in nursing homes since last spring. In response to the controversy, Democrat and Republican lawmakers said last week they are reconsidering granting Cuomo emergency powers to contend with the pandemic.
On day 2 of a snap lockdown in New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland, the country recorded no new cases of COVID-19. New measures were imposed on Auckland's 2 million residents after 3 new infections were detected there on the weekend. The more transmissible UK variant was among the new cases and left authorities scrambling to trace the contacts of the family affected. New Zealand's Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield.
Contact tracing inquiries have now identified 109 close contacts outside the household. This increase in number is predominantly because of a very precautionary approach to people classified as close contacts at a new location of interest, which was a medical centre waiting room where the father wasn't in the red lane for COVID testing.
The Auckland lockdown is the first in New Zealand in 6 months and prompted Australia to suspend its travel bubble with its neighbour. The arrangement had allowed New Zealanders to enter Australia without serving a 14-day hotel quarantine period. Meanwhile, New Zealand is gearing up to start its mass inoculation programme. The first batch of 600,000 COVID-19 vaccines arrived in the country on Monday. Once safety checks have been done, border officials will start receiving the Pfizer-BioNTech injection from Saturday.
A rocket attack on a U.S.-led military base in Erbil, Iraq, left a civilian contractor dead on Monday. The blast wounded 5 others, including an American service member. That's according to initial reports from the U.S. coalition in the country. A Shia militia group with alleged ties to Iran has claimed responsibility for the bombing without providing evidence, saying it targeted American occupation in Iraq. It was the deadliest attack on U.S.-led forces there in almost a year, where tensions have escalated between U.S.-aligned Iraqi and Kurdish forces and Iran-aligned militias. Erbil is the regional capital in Iraq's northern Kurdish area. Kurdish security forces said at least 3 rockets hit near the international airport there. Adjacent to the airport is a U.S.-occupied military base, where Reuters reporters heard loud explosions and saw a fire erupt. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday the United States was outraged by the attack. In a statement, he said he had reached out to Kurdistan's leadership to, quote, discuss the incident and to pledge our support for all efforts to investigate and hold accountable those responsible. The last deadly attack to target the coalition killed 1 British and 2 American personnel in March last year.
I'm very proud to be the first African. I'm proud to be the first woman.
Former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is making history. She received unanimous backing on Monday to become the first woman and first African Director General of the World Trade Organization. And her appointment comes 3 months after her bid for the job was rejected by the last U.S. president. In his push to reshape global trade to better benefit the U.S., Trump tried to undercut the WTO and partially paralyzed it by blocking appointments to its top appeals body. In an interview with Reuters, she said her top priority would be to do more to address the COVID-19 pandemic, calling the disparities in vaccine rates between rich and poor countries unconscionable.
Maybe at the end of the year that we come to some solutions as to how the WTO can help make vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics accessible in an equitable and affordable fashion to all countries, particularly to poor countries.
She also said her priorities were aligned with Washington's and thanked the Biden administration for its confidence. She said her pride in being the first woman and the first African for the job, quote, doesn't help if you can't deliver, telling Reuters she's focused on trying to achieve results.
I want to make sure that people remember my continent producing the first leader of the WTO that made a difference.
Is there life on Mars? Or at least was there? That question should be answered in the coming years, with a host of probes arriving at the Red Planet. NASA's 1-ton Perseverance probe is the US's most ambitious Mars mission.
We know that we're going to make discoveries with the Mars Perseverance rover that are going to make us ask a whole lot more questions.
It's expected to arrive on Mars in February 2021 after a 7-month journey.
And Atlas TU has gone to closed-loop control.
It'll attempt a landing on a rocky depression and gather rock samples. Much is riding on the outcome of the $2.7 billion mission. building on discoveries of nearly 20 US outings to Mars dating back to Mariner 4's 1965 flyby. Perseverance may set the stage for scientists to conclusively show whether life has existed beyond Earth, while paving the way for eventual human missions. China's Tianwen-1, or Questions to Heaven mission, left Earth in July 2020.
The Long March 5 Y-4 rocket was launched. The launch was a complete success.
Less than 7 months later, the spacecraft entered the orbit of Mars and sent its Lunar New Year greetings back from the Red Planet. China's space agency said the probe is expected to land on Mars in May or June 2021. If the landing is successful, the solar-powered rover will explore the Martian surface for 90 days, studying its soil and seeking signs of ancient life, including any subsurface water and ice using a ground-penetrating radar. The ExoMars program will also join the search for life on Mars in 2022. It's a joint endeavour between the European Space Agency, ESA, and the Russian space agency, Roscosmos. After delays to its original 2020 launch, the ExoMars rover is now scheduled for September 2022, landing on Mars in June 2023.
This is a project which is aiming to send a rover to Mars to not just look for evidence that life might exist, such as water features, but to actually detect that life was present on Mars at one point in history.
The rover, named the Rosalind Franklin, is built by Airbus and has autonomous navigation, meaning it can steer itself rather than waiting for instructions from Earth. Its engineers hope that its state-of-the-art onboard laboratory will be able to answer the most crucial question of whether there was life on Mars first. The United Arab Emirates Hope probe is the first Arabic mission to Mars.
From the mission's leader to all the teams, to the people of the United Arab Emirates and the Arab and Islamic world, we announce that the UAE has successfully entered the Red Planet's orbit. Thank God, thank God, thank God.
It's part of the country's efforts to develop its scientific and technological capabilities and reduce its reliance on oil. The UAE Space Agency, the fifth globally to reach the planet, has a plan for a Mars settlement by 2117.
And this was our last report. Thank you for watching and goodbye.